As of the making of this video, last week's New Testament video has 0 views and 1 comment from what appears to be a bot. So, whether you're watching this this week or later this year maybe, or 2021 or 2051, if you're watching this and can get some use out of this, then I'm glad about that. If nothing else, I said that one of my goals at the beginning of this project was to help myself be consistent with reading through the Bible throughout the course of 2020. And hey, I'm still here, so at least something is being accomplished. But for those of you following along, we are in the middle of the Gospel of Luke. And we are here in chapters 12 to 16, right in the heart of the book, and few things that we want to point out. One is actually something that was introduced in last week's reading, when in chapter 9, verse 51, it said that Jesus had set his face to go to Jerusalem. That idea is repeated again in this section a few times, and even look for subtle phrases like as he was going along. This does a couple things for the story that's being told. One thing it does is just gives it the feel of what's called a road story. We're familiar with this kind of thing in literature, be it the Odyssey, be it Lord of the Rings. And whenever a story is happening on a journey, it gives this sense of progression, of the characters developing, of learning, of growing. And I think the story of Luke shows us that that's exactly what following Jesus is. But the fact that he's going to Jerusalem, and that keeps being repeated, is setting up this conflict that is growing between Jesus and the establishment of the Jewish leaders. And so we have Sabbath healings in this section where the Pharisees or the Jewish leaders question him for healing on the Sabbath, and some pretty direct rebukes that Jesus will make of their hypocrisy. And there's one section in particular in chapter 13 where he actually says that he has tried to gather Jerusalem under his wing and offer it his protection, but time and time again they have refused to accept his protection, to accept God's protection. And so he says it's fitting that he as a prophet would go and die in Jerusalem, being rejected by those people. And so that theme is being developed in this section. And I would say in general, this sets up a sense of urgency. There's an ominous feeling hanging over these passages in Luke. For instance, in chapter 12, there will be this talk of being ready for when judgment will happen. And maybe Jesus has in mind the destruction of Jerusalem, but in general, there's this principle of staying ready and being aware that something big is happening, that God is working, and that we need to be ready for it. One of the other themes that we see developed and continued in this section is that of reversal. We saw this before, but Jesus says explicitly in chapter 13, verse 30, that those that are first will be last, and the last will be first. And one of the ways that is most clear is with exactly what we've been talking about. That Jesus says that the Jews, those who know the law, those that have been given this covenant relationship with Jehovah, many of them will miss out on the kingdom, while others, people that they think to be unworthy, Gentiles even, will be brought into the kingdom. But maybe the most striking illustration of this principle that the last will be first and the first will be last is in chapter 15, where he tells the parable of the prodigal son, where there is this the one brother that goes away and wastes his father's inheritance, but when he repents and comes back, his father kills the fatted calf for him. And meanwhile, his brother, who has been there all along, is bitter and resentful and unwilling to accept the fact that his brother could come back and find forgiveness and find a place in his father's house. And that story embodies this reversal that Jesus is talking about over and over again. We see it a lot in this section. And one of the most poignant ways in which this point is applied to people that would follow Jesus is what Jesus says in this section and in other places in Luke about one's attitude toward money. He says explicitly in chapter 16, you cannot serve God and money. Think about how it fits in. In fact, in chapter 16, in that next verse, Jesus says the things that are highly esteemed in the eyes of man are detestable in the eyes of God. And he specifically is saying that in regards to money. The world values money, and those that have money are popular and influential. But in the kingdom of God, money is in many ways a hindrance because it distracts people. He says that in chapter 12, talking about the anxiety, the worry that we have over material possessions. He says, don't worry about those things. Know that God will provide for you. But Jesus also says that if we can fix our attitude towards money, not worry about it, be consumed with it, and not love it, and not be greedy, that money can be a great tool for us in advancing the kingdom of God and bearing fruit in the kingdom of God. He says there, after saying don't worry about money, he says be generous and sell your possessions and give to those who are in need. And then in chapter 16, he tells this odd parable of the unjust steward. And of course, he's not praising this man for being deceptive, but what he's saying is that this man took advantage of the opportunity that he had, and the people of God ought to take advantage of the opportunities they have while they have the opportunity to use their money for God's purposes. So this is what Jesus says as he is approaching Jerusalem and facing that conflict. His message is a message of reversal, and it's urgent because of the time that is at hand. And so he calls on his disciples to use their whole lives to serve him, and especially to use their money for his purposes and not let it distract them and prevent them from, as he says, staying ready for when God's judgment will come. And I think we'll continue to see these things as we move forward and spend more time in the Gospel of Luke next week. Again, if you are watching this, we hope that it's helpful. You can subscribe below and be notified of future videos, and return to this channel for Bible reading videos in both Old Testament and New Testament. Have a good week, and thank you.